The ice was the color of old bone. I'd been riding the flats since before first light, trying to get ahead of a herd that didn't want to be gotten ahead of, and the cold had settled into my hands the way cold does when you're past 40, not stinging anymore, just sitting there like something that belongs. My horse Cutter had his head down against the wind. I had mine down too. Neither of us was looking for anything. That's when I saw the shape. Small, dark against all that white, too still for an animal, too far from the tree line for sense. I pulled Cutter up and sat a moment, watching. The shape didn't move. Wind pushed a skiff of snow across the flats and the shape stayed where it was, and something in my chest, something I hadn't used in a long while, went tight. I rode over. She was maybe 9 years old, maybe 10, sitting with her knees drawn up on the ice at the edge of a frozen creek bed, arms wrapped around herself, wearing a dress that might have been enough in September. No coat, no blanket, boots that were wrong for this weather by half a season. Her lips had gone the color of creek clay, and her eyes, when she looked up at me, were not frightened. That was the part that hit me. She wasn't frightened. She was just waiting to see what came next. Like she'd already used up her fright and was running on something quieter. I got down off Cutter. I said, "You alone out here?" She said, "Yes, sir." I pulled off my coat and put it around her shoulders without asking. It swallowed her whole. I didn't crouch down to her level or speak soft the way you might to a spooked colt. I just stood there and let her be what she was, which was cold and small and not going to cry about it. "Where's your people?" She pointed back toward the Callan Road. Half a mile, maybe more. I knew the road. It ran north to the feed depot at Murrow and south to Nothing Good. "Grandfather took my coat," she said. "He needed it for trade." She said it the way you say the creek runs south or the fence needs mending, plain fact, no complaint in it. That was worse than crying would have been. I picked her up and set her on Cutter's back and walked us toward the road. Her name was Ada Voss. Her grandfather was Clement Voss, and if you'd been working this valley for more than a season, you knew the name. He moved through the settlements trading whatever he had, or whatever wasn't quite his, for whiskey, and then he moved on and did it again. Ada had been with him since her mother died, which from the sound of it had been 2 winters back. She told me this the way she told me everything else, in short, plain sentences, like she was reporting conditions in a field rather than her own life. I listened and didn't say anything stupid about it. We came off the flats onto the Callan Road, and I saw Voss maybe a quarter-mile ahead, moving slow, coat on his back, bottle in his coat pocket from the look of the sag. He didn't turn around. I thought about a few things. I thought about hailing him and handing her back and riding on. That was the sensible thing. Whatever was happening between a grandfather and his grandchild wasn't my territory, and I had a herd to get ahead of, and a contract in Murrow that wouldn't hold past Friday. I thought about it for a fair moment. Then I looked at her hands, which were still the wrong color, and I kept walking. The Hollowell place was the nearest, with a cook fire and a woman in it. Eleanor Hollowell was a widow, 50 or so, with opinions and a big kitchen and no patience for nonsense, which I had always respected. I brought Ada to her door, and Eleanor took one look and pulled Ada inside, and that was the end of my involvement, I thought. Eleanor fed her, wrapped her feet, sent a boy to find the county agent. I stood in the kitchen doorway and drank the coffee Eleanor handed me and watched Ada eat. She ate like someone who'd learned not to eat fast because fast eating drew attention. Small bites, eyes on her plate. When Eleanor set a second piece of cornbread in front of her, Ada looked up first, checking before she touched it. I set the coffee cup down. I rode to find Voss. I found him at the depot, which was also where you could buy whiskey if you knew the back arrangement. He was working on his second bottle by the look of his eyes when I stepped in front of him, and he focused on me slow, like a man turning a heavy wheel. I said, "Clement Voss." He said, "Don't know you." I said, "You left a child on the ice." He looked at me with the particular blankness of a man who has told himself a version of every bad thing he's done, until the bad thing doesn't register anymore. He said something about weather, and how a little cold never hurt anyone, and Ada being tougher than she looked. I'm not a man who hits people for the pleasure of it. I'm also not a man who stands and listens to stupidity dressed up as explanation. I said what I had to say, which was short and not gentle, and I told him that the county agent was already involved, and if he went back to Alina Hollowell's place looking for that girl, I would hear about it, and hearing about it would go badly for him. He tried to get big about it. I waited. He looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look where a man is measuring whether there's anything worth fighting for, and then he looked away, and that was that. Some men you don't need to lay a hand on. You just need to be the thing standing between them and the easier road. I got to Murrow 2 days late, lost the contract. I won't say I didn't feel it. I felt it considerable. I had a horse, a bedroll, and $43, and winter was not done with us yet, and I was 44 years old and not building toward anything in particular. The loss of the contract was the kind of thing that makes a man sit with himself in the cold and ask certain questions. I asked them, didn't get any answers I liked. I took day work where I could find it, fence repair, loading at the depot, the kind of work that's available when you're too old to be desirable and too solvent to be desperate. I stayed in a room above the feed store that had one window and a stove that smoked wrong, and I kept myself to myself. That was February. In March, Alina Hollowell sent a boy with a note. The note said Ada was with the Creighton family now over on the east side of the valley, which was a decent family with a farm and 2 other children, and a woman who knew how to mother. It said Ada was eating well and had stopped flinching at loud sounds mostly. It said Ada asked about the man with the tall horse. I read that line twice. I folded the note and put it in my shirt pocket. Sometime in early April, I rode out to the Creighton place with no particular plan. I told myself I was just checking. You do a thing and you want to know it held, that's all. Martha Creighton met me at the fence line. She was a solid woman, straightforward, the kind that gets right to it. She said Ada was doing well. She said Ada had nightmares still, but less. She said Ada had started helping in the kitchen and had a talent for it, and she said Ada had talked about me more than once. I said I was glad the girl was settled. Martha Creighton looked at me a moment. Then she said, "You ought to come in, she'd want to see you." I went in. Ada was at the kitchen table with flour on her hands and the particular concentration of a child doing something she cares about getting right. She looked up when I came in the door. For a moment she was very still. Then something in her face moved, not a big movement, just a shift, the way a room changes when someone opens the curtains. She said, "You came back." I said, "Just checking you were all right." She looked at me with those steady eyes and she said, "I knew you would." I didn't know what to do with that. I stood there in the doorway with my hat in my hands, and somewhere in my chest that thing that had gone tight back on the ice pulled a little tighter, and this time it didn't feel like dread. I started coming by, first once a week, then more. I told myself it was the ride, the valley was pretty in spring, and Cutter needed the exercise. I told myself things like that for about a month before I stopped telling myself things. What I knew was that Ada Creighton, she'd taken to using their name, was going to be all right. She was growing into something solid. She still had the watchful eyes and the plain way of talking, but there was something behind it now that hadn't been there on the ice. Some warmth, some ease. When she laughed, which she did more, it came up from somewhere real. And Martha Creighton, it turned out, had a friend. Her name was Nora Crane. She was a widow, 40, came from Ohio originally, had a piece of land she was trying to hold on her own after her husband went 2 winters back from a lung sickness. Dark hair, not tall, moved like someone who was always thinking about the next thing that needed doing. She was at the Creighton place most Sundays, and after a while she was there on the days I came too. We didn't have a courtship. We had conversations that lasted longer than either of us meant them to, and silences that weren't uncomfortable, and a slow, unremarkable accumulation of time spent in the same direction. She never asked me what I was building toward. She'd stopped asking herself that, I think, after her husband died. What she had was land and work and a set of practical skills, and enough grit to keep going when going was hard, and she had, she said, no patience for men who needed a woman to make them feel important. I told her that suited me. She said good. That was as close as we got to a declaration. In October, I helped her get her hay in before the first frost. 2 days of cutting and stacking, just the two of us, and at the end of the second day we sat on the fence rail in the cold and watched the light go off the hills, and she handed me coffee from a tin and said, "I'm not going anywhere." I looked at her. She was looking at the hills. She said it again, quieter, like she was confirming something to herself. "I'm not going anywhere." I drank the coffee. The hills went dark. After a while I said, "Neither am I." She looked at me then. Just looked. And in that look was everything she'd decided and not said, that she'd measured this and chosen it, that she wasn't doing it out of loneliness or fear or a calculation about winter, that she was doing it because she'd watched me long enough to know what I was, and what I was enough. More than enough, the kind of enough that doesn't need explaining. I am not a man who has been looked at that way very many times. Ada Creighton came to our wedding in May, which was a small thing at the Creighton place, mostly family and a couple of the Valley people. She wore a blue dress and her hair was done up, and she was 12 now, almost 13, and you could see in the way she carried herself that she was going to be a serious person, the good kind of serious. After the ceremony she came and stood next to me. She put her hand in mine for a moment, just for a moment, the way a child will when they want to say something they don't have words for. I held her hand. Then she let go and went back to the other children, and I watched her go, and Nora was beside me then, her shoulder against my arm, not saying anything, just there. The afternoon light came through the Creighton barn door at a long angle and lay across the floor in one clean bar, and the smell of the place was hay and wood smoke and coffee, and the particular smell of good people in a warm room. I stood in it. A man who has spent a lot of years not mattering to anyone learns to be careful about good things, careful not to trust them. But standing there with Nora's shoulder against my arm and Ada's hand still warm in mine from where she'd held it, I thought, not in words exactly, but in the way you know something when it settles into your bones. This is it. This is what the rest looks like. I kept that.